I'm Audrey, 32 years old, and I never thought my birthday would end with exposing two traitors. The candles on my cake hadn't even been blown out when my sister stood up, placed her hand on my husband Daniel's shoulder, and announced they were expecting a baby together. "We're a family now," she sneered, waiting for me to collapse. Instead, I raised my glass with a smile, ready to reveal a secret that would shatter their perfect little fantasy. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with toxic family members. Growing up with Heather was always a competition, though I never signed up for it. 3 years younger than me, she seemed to make it her life mission to acquire anything I had. From toys to friends to academic achievements, if I had it, she wanted it. And our parents, Harold and Evelyn, rarely intervened in ways that helped. "Sisters compete. It's natural," my mother would say, whenever I complained about Heather stealing my clothes or copying my school projects. What my parents called healthy sibling rivalry felt more like a one-sided obsession to me. I excelled in school despite Heather's attempts to distract me or undermine my efforts. While she was busy trying to be me, I focused on becoming the best version of myself. By the time I reached college, I had developed a protective shell around my accomplishments and personal life. I pursued marketing with a passion that eventually led me to become an executive at one of the top firms in the city. My career became my sanctuary, a place where Heather couldn't reach. Then came Daniel. We met 5 years ago at a corporate event where his financial consulting firm was pitching services to my company. He approached me at the bar after the presentations, and unlike most men who tried to impress me with industry jargon, he asked about my favorite books. We talked for hours that night, and I found myself charmed by his intelligence and seemingly genuine interest in my thoughts. Within 6 months, he had proposed with a vintage emerald ring that he said reminded him of my eyes. Our wedding 3 years ago was everything I dreamed of: intimate, elegant, and meaningful. Heather served as my maid of honor, a decision I made partly out of family obligation and partly out of hope that our adult relationship could heal. During her speech, she made several comments about always looking up to me and following in my footsteps that made guests uncomfortable with their intensity, but I brushed it off as poor social awareness on her part. The first 2 years of marriage were blissful. Daniel and I moved into a beautiful townhouse, traveled extensively, and talked about starting a family when the time was right. We were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's careers and dreams. I felt I had finally found a safe space with someone who chose me for me, not because of or in spite of my sister. About 8 months ago, things began to shift. Daniel started working late more frequently. His phone would ping at odd hours, and he'd take calls in another room. When I asked questions, he'd explain it away as work stress or client emergencies. I believed him because I wanted to, because trust was the foundation I thought we'd built. Around the same time, Heather went through a dramatic breakup with her boyfriend of 2 years. She called me sobbing one night, claiming he'd left her for someone else with no warning. Being the supportive sister I always tried to be, I invited her over for dinner that weekend. Daniel suggested she could stay in our guest room for a few days, if she needed space from her apartment that held too many memories. A few days turned into frequent visits. Daniel, to my initial gratitude, seemed to take a brotherly interest in helping Heather get back on her feet. He offered to review her resume, connected her with job opportunities through his network, and even accompanied her to a work function when I was out of town for a conference. At the time, I interpreted his actions as kindness toward my family, and perhaps an attempt to build a better relationship with my sister. Looking back, I should have noticed how Heather's eyes followed Daniel around rooms, how she'd casually touch his arm during conversations, how she'd mysteriously appear in workout clothes when he returned from his morning run. I should have paid attention to how Daniel began suggesting we invite Heather to more of our couple activities, claiming she was lonely and needed support. My parents noticed nothing amiss. In fact, they praised Daniel constantly for bringing the family closer together and helping Heather through her difficult time. "He's such a good man," my mother would say. "You're lucky to have found someone who cares about your family as much as you do." Their validation of Daniel's behavior only strengthened my denial that anything inappropriate was happening. 2 months before my birthday, I overheard a phone conversation between Daniel and someone that raised the first serious alarm bells. He was in his home office door slightly ajar, speaking in hushed tones. "We need to be more careful," he said. "I don't want anyone getting hurt." There was a pause before he continued. I know. We'll figure it out, I promise." When I asked him about it later, he claimed it was a sensitive client situation involving potential investment fraud. His explanation was detailed and plausible, and I wanted to believe him. As my birthday approached, I hoped the celebration would bring back the connection I felt we were losing. I made reservations at Elysium, an upscale restaurant, known for its intimate atmosphere and excellent wine selection. I invited my parents, my cousin Emily, my best friend Tara, and of course Daniel and Heather. I envisioned an evening of good food, meaningful toasts, and perhaps a rekindling of the warmth that had been missing from my marriage. Instead, I was walking into a trap set by the two people who should have loved me most. Elysium lived up to its reputation that evening. The soft amber lighting, the pristine white tablecloths, and the subtle scent of herbs created an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. Our table, positioned near the back for privacy, offered a partial view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. I arrived early with Tara, wanting to ensure everything was perfect. "You look gorgeous," Tara said, admiring my fitted burgundy dress that I'd splurged on for the occasion. 32 looks good on you." Tara had been my best friend since college, the one person who had no connection to my family and therefore offered unbiased perspectives on my relationships. She'd expressed subtle concerns about Daniel's behavior recently, but respected my defensiveness enough to back off. My parents arrived next, my father Harold in his standard navy blazer, and my mother Evelyn wearing too much perfume as usual. They presented me with a small jewelry box containing pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. "She would have wanted you to have these on your birthday," my mother said, kissing my cheek. Emily, my cousin, from my mother's side, arrived shortly after apologizing for being a few minutes late. She had always been the family peacekeeper, skillfully navigating the complicated dynamics between Heather and me without taking sides. Daniel was 20 minutes late, arriving with a brief apology about a client call running long. He kissed me quickly on the cheek, rather than the lips, a detail that registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but didn't fully process at the moment. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly styled, but there was a tension in his shoulders that seemed out of place for a birthday celebration. "Where's Heather?" my mother asked immediately, always tracking her younger daughter's whereabouts. "She texted she's on her way," Daniel answered, before I could revealing he'd been in communication with my sister without my knowledge, another red flag I chose to ignore. Heather made her entrance 10 minutes later, commanding attention, in a form-fitting emerald green dress that seemed inappropriate for a sister's birthday dinner. She carried an unusually large gift bag, with elaborate tissue paper exploding from the top. Her smile seemed practiced as she air-kissed me, then took the seat next to Daniel, rather than the one next to Emily that I had mentally assigned her. "Happy birthday, sis," she said, pushing the large gift toward me. "You can open it later, it's special." The waiter arrived to take our drink orders, and my father immediately requested a bottle of champagne for the table. "We need to properly toast our firstborn," he announced, looking at me with genuine pride. "Audrey, you've always exceeded our expectations in every way. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become." I felt a momentary warmth at his words, so rare was his direct praise. Daniel shifted in his seat, his discomfort noticeable to me, if not to others. He kept glancing at his watch, and then at Heather, who maintained a strange half-smile throughout the appetizer course. As we shared calamari and bruschetta, the conversation flowed pleasantly on the surface. My mother discussed her garden club's upcoming competition, Emily shared amusing stories about her kindergarten students, and Tara mentioned her recent promotion. Yet beneath this normal exchange, I sensed currents of tension. Daniel barely contributed to the conversation, and when he did, his comments seemed rehearsed. Heather, normally eager to dominate any discussion, was uncharacteristically selective with her words, as if saving her energy for something bigger. "So, how's the job search going, Heather?" I asked, trying to engage my sister in genuine conversation. "Oh, it's going," she replied vaguely. "I've had some interesting developments recently that might change everything." She exchanged a look with Daniel that lasted a beat too long. Our entrees arrived, momentarily distracting everyone, with the presentation of perfectly seared scallops, roasted duck, and truffle risotto. I barely tasted my food, increasingly disturbed by the subtle interactions I was observing between my husband and sister. Their hands brushed when reaching for the breadbasket. They seemed to communicate in glances and slight nods. Once I could have sworn I saw Daniel squeeze her knee under the table. My mother, oblivious to the undercurrents, dominated the conversation with questions about when Daniel and I plan to give them grandchildren. "You're not getting any younger, Audrey," she remarked, as if 32 put me at death's door. "And you two have been married long enough to have your careers established." "We're working on our timing," I replied automatically, the response I'd given for months. Daniel stared intently at his plate, while Heather's smile grew more pronounced, almost predatory. "Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them," Heather interjected, raising her water glass in what seemed like a private toast to Daniel. As dinner progressed, my anxiety grew. The cake, a 3-layer chocolate creation with raspberry filling that I'd normally have been excited about, was brought out with 32 delicate candles flickering in the dimmed restaurant lighting. The servers and my dinner guests began the traditional birthday song, but before I could make a wish or blow out the candles, Heather suddenly stood up, tapping her knife against her water glass to command attention. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the singing. "Before Audrey makes her wish, I have an announcement that might just make it come true." The singing stopped abruptly. All eyes turned to Heather, who remained standing, her posture radiating triumph. Daniel's face had drained of color, though a muscle twitching in his jaw suggested he knew what was coming. My father looked annoyed at the interruption, while my mother leaned forward with eager curiosity. Tara's hand moved closer to mine on the table, a subconscious gesture of support. "I've been keeping a wonderful secret," Heather continued, her voice carrying across the now silent table. "But it's time to share our joy with the family." She placed deliberate emphasis on our glancing down at Daniel, before returning her gaze to me. "I'm pregnant." The statement hung in the air for a moment before she delivered the killing blow. "And Daniel is the father." She placed her hand possessively on Daniel's shoulder. "We're a family now," she sneered, eyes locked on mine, waiting for the public meltdown she had choreographed this entire evening to witness. My mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. My father's face contorted from confusion to dawning comprehension, to rage in the span of seconds. Emily froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips, eyes wide with shock. Tara's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard, grounding me in the moment. Daniel, for his part, looked both ashamed and defiant. He didn't deny Heather's claim. Instead, he sat straighter, as if preparing to defend their betrayal. "Audrey," he began, his voice strained, "this isn't how we wanted you to find out." "We," I repeated, the single word feeling foreign in my mouth. "It just happened." Heather jumped in her free hand, moving to her still flat stomach in a theatrical gesture. "We tried to fight our feelings, but some connections are just too strong to deny." The restaurant around us continued its normal evening service, other diners oblivious to the implosion of my life happening just tables away. A server approached, sensed the tension, and retreated without a word. The candles on my cake continued to burn, wax slowly dripping onto the perfect frosting. "How long?" my father demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. 8 months, Daniel admitted, unable to meet my father's eyes or mine. "It started when Heather was staying with us after her breakup." 8 months. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 8 months of lies. 8 months of them laughing at me behind my back. 8 months of me trusting, believing, making excuses for Daniel's emotional and physical distance. Fragments of memories crashed through my mind. Daniel insisting Heather stay with us, their private conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Unexplained charges on our credit card for restaurants. I'd never visited work trips that didn't match his company calendar. The signs had been everywhere, and I had chosen not to see them. I know this is a shock, Heather continued, clearly disappointed by my lack of tears or screaming. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Daniel and I never meant to hurt you. My mother finally found her voice. You announced this at your sister's birthday dinner. What is wrong with you, Heather? Heather shrugged the gesture, dismissive and childish. It felt like the right time with everyone here. And honestly, Audrey always finds out eventually when I take something of hers. This just speeds up the process. The casual cruelty of her statement silenced the table again. This wasn't just an affair born of misplaced feelings or circumstances. This was deliberate. This was Heather's latest and most devastating attempt to take what was mine, simply because it was mine. I felt a strange detachment spread through me, as if I were floating above the scene observing someone else's tragedy. The physical sensations were acute, my heart pounding against my ribs, a metallic taste in my mouth, the heat of shame and anger burning across my skin, but emotionally I had entered a state of crystalline clarity. Everyone at the table was staring at me, waiting for the reaction Heather had promised them. Tears, accusations, perhaps even a physical confrontation that would give the restaurant patrons a story to share for weeks. Daniel looked braced for impact, his body tense, as if expecting me to throw something. My mother seemed ready to intercede if things became too ugly. My father appeared on the verge of his own explosion. But in that moment of terrible clarity, I realized that giving them the dramatic reaction they expected would only confirm what Heather had always believed, that she had the power to destroy me, that she had won, that Daniel had been a prize she had successfully taken rather than a weak, disloyal man who had failed us both. I also realized with sudden certainty that they had made a critical miscalculation. They thought they held all the cards, that their announcement was the final move in their game. They had no idea I possessed information that would turn their moment of triumph into catastrophe. I carefully folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I reached for my champagne glass, still full and bubbling, and I smiled. The smile caught them off guard. Heather's triumphant expression faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her features. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps recognizing a look he'd seen before when I was about to outmaneuver a business competitor. My parents exchanged glances, uncertain what my calm demeanor signified. I stood slowly, champagne glass in hand, maintaining perfect posture despite the earthquake happening within me. The restaurant's soft lighting caught the crystal, sending prisms of light dancing across the white tablecloth. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, my voice steady and clear. Every eye at the table locked onto me, waiting. To new beginnings, I continued, raising my glass higher, to truths revealed and masks removed. Daniel's expression shifted from discomfort to wariness. He knew me well enough to sense the danger beneath my composed exterior. Congratulations on your pregnancy announcement, Heather. It's certainly dramatic timing, though I can't say I'm surprised by your methods. I took a small sip of champagne, allowing the tension to build. But there's something rather important you should know about your supposed happy family news. I turned my gaze directly to Daniel, who had begun to pale visibly. Daniel had a vasectomy 3 months ago. The words landed like a bomb at the center of the table. Heather's hand dropped from her stomach as if burned. Daniel's face went from pale to ashen. That's not possible," Heather stammered, looking frantically at Daniel. Tell her, Daniel. Tell her she's lying." But Daniel couldn't speak. He knew it was true. "I found the paperwork in his desk drawer 2 months ago," I continued calmly. "He had it done at the Riverside Clinic under Dr. Warren. The appointment was on March 15th, a Tuesday. He told me he had a client lunch." I turned back to Heather. "So while I congratulate you on your pregnancy, I'm afraid Daniel can't be the father. It's a biological impossibility." "You had a vasectomy, without telling me," Heather shrieked at Daniel, her composed facade crumbling entirely. "You let me believe we could have a family." Daniel finally found his voice, though it emerged as a desperate croak. "Audrey, I can explain. I was going to tell you about the procedure, but then things with Heather happened, and I decided to let her believe you could father her child. I finished for him. That seems unnecessarily cruel even for you." My father, who had been sitting in stunned silence, let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "So, not only did you cheat on my daughter with her sister, but you're not even man enough to take responsibility for the consequences. Whose baby is it then, Heather?" All eyes turned to Heather, whose face had transformed from triumphant to trapped. She looked wildly around the table, searching for an ally, and finding none. "I don't. It has to be Daniel's," she insisted, though her voice had lost its certainty. "Maybe the procedure didn't work. That happens sometimes, right?" "The success rate is over 99%, I replied, remembering the statistics from the pamphlet I'd found with the medical documents. And Daniel had his follow-up test confirming 0 sperm count. The paperwork for that was dated April 28th. Tara, who had remained supportively silent until now, couldn't suppress a small sound that might have been a choke of disbelief or a stifled laugh. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to penetrate the initial shock. "You knew," Daniel asked me, his voice hollow. "You knew about the vasectomy all this time and didn't say anything." "I was waiting for you to tell me," I replied simply. "I thought perhaps you were worried about my reaction, that you'd made the decision without consulting me, because you truly didn't want children. I was prepared to have that difficult conversation. What I wasn't prepared for was that you were using it as birth control for your affair with my sister, while presumably leading her to believe you could give her a child." Daniel buried his face in his hands. It wasn't like that, he mumbled through his fingers. "Then what was it like, Daniel?" My mother's voice cut through the air like ice. Her initial shock had hardened into cold fury. "Please explain to all of us what possible justification you have for this behavior." Before Daniel could attempt an explanation, Heather stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be humiliated," she spat, though the irony of her statement seemed lost on her. "Daniel, we're leaving." Daniel didn't move. He remained hunched over a picture of defeat. "Daniel," Heather repeated, her voice rising. "Let's go. Now." When he still didn't respond, Heather snapped. "Fine. Stay here with her. But don't think for a second this baby isn't real. I am pregnant. And maybe it's not yours, but you were sleeping with me willingly enough. What does that make you?" "A fool," my father answered before Daniel could. "And a disgrace." Heather's gaze darted frantically around the table before settling on me. The hatred in her eyes was palpable. "You think you've won. You've lost your husband and your sister in one night. Enjoy your birthday cake alone." As she turned to storm out, I called after her with one last question. "Heather, just out of curiosity, whose baby is it actually?" She froze, then turned back with a bitter laugh. "Wouldn't you like to know? Maybe it's Kyle from my office, or Jason from the gym, or Brett from the bar last month. I guess we'll all find out together, won't we?" With that parting shot, she stalked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a table of stunned faces and the wreckage of multiple relationships. Daniel finally looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and calculation. "Audrey, can we talk privately, please? This has all gotten so out of hand." "Out of hand," I repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call sleeping with my sister for 8 months and letting her announce a fraudulent pregnancy at my birthday dinner?" "I never knew about the pregnancy announcement," he protested quickly. "That was all Heather's idea. I would never have agreed to that." "But you agreed to everything else," I stated flatly. "Every lie, every betrayal, every moment. You made me doubt my own instincts when I sensed something was wrong." The fight seemed to leave him suddenly. "What do you want me to say?" "That I'm sorry, I am. More than you can imagine." "Sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught?" Tara interjected, unable to contain her disgust any longer. Daniel had no answer for that. The birthday cake sat forgotten its candles, now extinguished by their own melted wax. Our server approached cautiously clearly, having observed enough of the drama to know something significant had transpired. "Would you like me to box up the cake?" she asked delicately. "Yes, please," I replied, suddenly aware of the public setting and the curious glances from nearby tables. "And the check, when you have a moment." "I'll take care of the bill," my father announced, reaching for his wallet. His hands were shaking slightly with suppressed rage. "It's the least I can do after this." Daniel started to object, but fell silent under my father's withering glare. My mother had been uncharacteristically quiet since Heather's departure. Now she reached across the table for my hand. "Audrey, darling, I don't know what to say. I had no idea that Heather would. That she could." Her voice trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of her younger daughter's betrayal. "None of us knew," I said, though. Part of me wondered if that was entirely true. Hadn't there always been signs of Heather's obsessive competitiveness, her need to possess what was mine? Hadn't my parents in their own way enabled her behavior by dismissing my concerns over the years? "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, gently speaking for the first time since the explosive revelations. Before I could answer, Daniel interjected. "Audrey, please, can we go home and talk about this? I know I've made terrible mistakes, but our marriage doesn't have to end over this." "Our marriage ended the moment you decided to sleep with my sister," I replied, surprised by my own certainty. "There's nothing to discuss." "You don't mean that?" he insisted, desperation edging into his voice. 5 years together, 3 years of marriage. You can't throw that away without even talking." "You threw it away," Tara pointed out bluntly. "Not Audrey." Daniel turned to her with a flash of anger. "This is between me and my wife." "No," I corrected him. "This was between you and my sister behind my back for 8 months. Now it's between you and your conscience, and between me and my future, a future that doesn't include you." The server returned with the boxed cake and the check, which my father quickly handled. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as we all processed what would happen next. "I'll be staying at Tara's tonight," I announced, making the decision in that moment. "Daniel, I expect you to be out of the house by tomorrow evening. Take what you need for a few days. We can arrange for you to collect the rest of your things later, through our lawyers." "Lawyers," he repeated, looking genuinely shocked. "Audrey, you're overreacting. We can work through this." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Work through this? There's nothing to work through. You had an 8-month affair with my sister, led her to believe you could father her child despite knowing you'd had a vasectomy, and sat silently while she tried to humiliate me on my birthday. What exactly do you think we can work through?" Daniel had no answer, just a desperate plea in his eyes that once might have moved me but now left me cold. I stood up, gathering my purse and the small gift bag from my parents, leaving Heather's oversized present untouched on the table. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sorry it turned out this way." "Don't apologize," my father said firmly. "None of this is your fault." Tara stood with me, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. "I've got her," she assured my parents. "We'll call you tomorrow." Daniel made one last attempt, reaching for my arm as I turned to leave. "Audrey, please, don't go like this." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. The face I had loved and trusted, now revealed as a mask for someone I didn't know at all. "Let go of me, Daniel." Something in my tone must have reached him, because he released me immediately, his hand falling limply to his side. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I hope Heather finds out who the father of her baby is. And I hope you both get exactly what you deserve." With those words I walked away, Tara steady beside me, leaving Daniel at the table with my parents and cousin in a tableau of destruction, entirely of his own making. The cool night air hit my face as we exited the restaurant, and only then did I allow the first tears to fall. Tara guided me to her car, opened the passenger door, and waited until I was seated before closing it gently. Once she was behind the wheel, she turned to me with concern. "Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to sit in silence? Both are equally valid right now." The simple kindness of her question broke something inside me. The composed facade I'd maintained throughout the dinner crumbled and sobs tore from my throat with a violence that surprised us both. Tara immediately reached across the console to hold me while I cried. For my marriage, for the years wasted on someone who had betrayed me so completely, for the sister I had tried to love, despite everything, and for the family that would never be the same again. I knew something was wrong. I managed between sobs. I knew it for months, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. How could I have been so blind? "You weren't blind," Tara said firmly. "You were trusting. There's a difference. They betrayed that trust. That's on them, not you." We sat in the car for nearly 30 minutes while I cycled through waves of grief, anger, and ultimately exhaustion. By the time Tara started the engine, my phone had begun lighting up with messages. From Daniel, from my mother, even one from Emily. I turned it off without reading any of them. The drive to Tara's apartment passed in a blur. I stared out the window at the city lights, feeling disconnected from the normal world continuing around me. People in other cars were heading home to intact lives, to relationships built on trust rather than lies. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm me again, but I had no tears left. Tara's apartment welcomed me with its familiar comfort, the soft gray couch where we'd shared countless glasses of wine and conversations, the bookshelves crammed with her eclectic collection, the subtle scent of the lavender, candles she favored. She guided me to her guest room, where an emergency overnight bag I kept at her place for impromptu girls' nights waited in the closet. "Take a hot shower," she suggested gently. "I'll make some tea, or pour some whiskey, or both. Your choice." "Both," I replied, attempting a weak smile. "Definitely both." That night, curled under the duvet in Tara's guest room, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what the next day would bring, and the day after that, and all the days that would follow this seismic shift in my life. The path I had believed I was on had vanished, leaving me in uncharted territory. The thought should have terrified me, but as exhaustion finally pulled me toward sleep, I felt the first tiny spark of something unexpected: freedom. 1 week after the birthday dinner from hell, I sat across from Gregory Barnes, a divorce attorney Tara's cousin had recommended. His office projected exactly the blend of confidence and discretion I needed. Tasteful art on the walls, substantial furniture that spoke of stability, and a view of the city that reminded me life continued beyond my personal crisis. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Evans, you have grounds for an at-fault divorce citing adultery." Gregory explained, his tone professional, but not without compassion. "Given the circumstances, we should be able to negotiate a favorable settlement." "I just want it over with as cleanly as possible," I replied, still finding it surreal to be discussing the end of my marriage with a stranger. "I don't want to drag things out for revenge." Gregory nodded approvingly. "That's a healthy approach. However, there's something you should know before we proceed." He opened a folder on his desk and turned it toward me. "We conducted a preliminary financial investigation, as is standard in these cases, and found some concerning transactions." I leaned forward to examine the documents he'd placed before me. Bank statements, credit card bills, and investment reports revealed a pattern that made my stomach clench. Over the past year, Daniel had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a separate account I knew nothing about. Smaller amounts at first, but increasing in size and frequency over the past 6 months. "The total diverted so far is approximately $75,000, Gregory said quietly. It appears he was preparing for either a separation on his terms, or a new life with my sister. I finished, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me, financial infidelity, on top of everything else. "The good news," Gregory continued, "is that we've caught this early, and these transactions create a paper trail that significantly strengthens your position. The courts take a very dim view of hiding marital assets." I stared at the numbers on the page, each one representing another lie Daniel had told while looking me in the eyes and claiming to love me. The shock was giving way to something harder and more determined within me. I would not let him take anything more from me, not my dignity, not my financial security, and certainly not my future. "What do we do next?" I asked, straightening in my chair. Gregory smiled slightly, perhaps approving of my resolve. "We file immediately and request a freeze on all marital assets. Then, we negotiate from a position of strength." The meeting with Gregory gave me a concrete focus, a problem to solve that wasn't purely emotional. I threw myself into gathering financial documents, securing valuables from our home, and following the strategic steps he outlined. The practical tasks anchored me when grief threatened to pull me under. 3 days later, I faced another difficult hurdle, a family meeting at my parents' house. My mother had insisted on it, claiming we needed to address the situation as a family. I agreed only after confirming that Heather would not be present. The tension in my childhood home was palpable. My mother had stress-cleaned the entire house, every surface gleaming, as if she could polish away the family disgrace. My father sat heavily in his favorite armchair, looking older than I had ever seen him. "We've spoken with Heather," my mother began once we were settled in the living room with untouched cups of tea. "She's staying with a friend from work. She's not well, Audrey." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, neutrally, unsure what response they expected from me. "Your father and I have been trying to make sense of all this," she continued, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. "We keep asking ourselves where we went wrong, how we could have raised a daughter who would do something so terrible to her own sister." "This isn't about your parenting," I said, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. Heather and Daniel made their choices as adults. "But there must have been signs," my father interjected. "Something we missed or ignored." The implied question hung in the air. Had I missed signs too? Had I enabled the betrayal through my own blindness? There were signs, I acknowledged after a moment. In both of them. But we see what we expect to see in the people we love. We make excuses. We fill in gaps with trust. That's not weakness, it's human. My mother reached for my hand across the coffee table. "We want to help you through this, Audrey. Whatever you need. If you want to move back home for a while." "Thank you, but no," I said firmly. "I need to handle this my own way. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer thinks it will be straightforward given the circumstances." "Divorce?" My mother repeated the word, seeming to pain her. "I never thought either of my daughters would go through this." "I never thought my husband would sleep with my sister," I replied more sharply than intended. Taking a deep breath, I softened my tone. "I know this is difficult for all of us, but I need to focus on rebuilding my life now." "Have you spoken to Daniel at all?" my father asked. "Only through lawyers. He's moved most of his things out of the house. He's staying at a hotel downtown, apparently." "And Heather, will you ever speak to her again?" The question struck me like a physical blow. Would I? Could I? Despite everything, she was still my sister, still bound to me by blood and shared history, but the damage felt irreparable, a chasm too wide to bridge. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Not now, maybe not ever. I can't think that far ahead yet." The conversation circled painfully for another hour. My parents seemed desperate to find a way to restore some semblance of family normalcy while I knew that was impossible. What had been broken couldn't be mended with good intentions or wishes to turn back time. As I was preparing to leave, my mother caught me in the hallway alone. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "Heather had a paternity test done. The baby's father is someone named Kyle Patterson. Apparently he works in her office." The information washed over me with surprising numbness. "Does he know?" "Yes. According to Heather, he wants nothing to do with the baby or her. Your father and I will help her, of course, but—" She trailed off, the future, suddenly uncertain for all of us. "Thank you for telling me," I said, not knowing what else to offer. In the weeks that followed, I developed a system for getting through each day. Mornings were for practical matters: work emails, legal consultations, house maintenance. Afternoons for self-care, therapy appointments, long walks, coffee with supportive friends. Evenings were the hardest when the silence of the house pressed in and memories ambushed me from everyday objects. Daniel's favorite coffee mug, the throw pillow, he always positioned just so the books we had read together in bed. Daniel made multiple attempts to see me sending texts, emails, even flowers to my office. Each message promised explanations, begged forgiveness, insisted our marriage was worth saving. I forwarded everything to Gregory without responding and focused on moving forward one step at a time. A month after the birthday dinner, I faced my first social appearance at a work colleague's wedding. I debated making an excuse, but my therapist encouraged me to attend as a milestone in my recovery. Tara offered to be my +1, and we prepared as if for battle, me in a new dress I would never have worn during my marriage, my wedding ring conspicuously absent. The whispers were inevitable. Despite my best efforts to keep my personal life private, rumors had circulated. I caught snippets as I moved through the reception. Affair with her sister. Announced it at her birthday. Complete disaster. But I also found unexpected support. My department head made a point of introducing me to potential clients, emphasizing my recent work successes. A senior executive I admired shared her own divorce story quietly over champagne. Colleagues I hadn't been particularly close to formed a protective circle around me on the dance floor, their solidarity a surprise gift. By the 2-month mark, the divorce proceedings were progressing smoothly, thanks largely to Daniel's apparent guilt and desire to avoid public court appearances. The financial discoveries continued. Not only had he been siphoning off money, but he had also opened credit cards in my name that I knew nothing about. Each revelation should have hurt, but instead reinforced my decision to end the marriage. I decided to take a 3-month sabbatical from work, using accumulated vacation time and the support of an understanding boss who valued me enough to hold my position. The time away would allow me to travel, to experience new places, without the shadow of my old life, to rediscover who Audrey was outside of being Daniel's wife or Heather's sister. Before leaving, I put our house on the market. The memories it contained were too painful, too tainted to allow for healing. Walking through the empty rooms after the furniture had been either sold or put into storage, I felt a curious lightness. The space that had witnessed both my happiest moments and deepest betrayal would soon belong to someone else, their own stories yet to be written within its walls. I found a small apartment in a neighborhood I had always admired, but Daniel had deemed too artsy. It was half the size of our house, but filled with natural light and possibilities. I signed a 1-year lease, furnished it minimally, with pieces that spoke only to my taste, and prepared for my journey. The first holiday season post-separation loomed as a potential emotional minefield. Thanksgiving had always been spent with my family, Christmas split between them and Daniel's parents in Colorado. This year I accepted an invitation from Tara and her family for Thanksgiving and booked a solo trip to Portugal for Christmas. My parents were hurt, but understanding when I explained I couldn't face family gatherings yet. "Will you see Heather at all?" my mother asked during one of our weekly phone calls, her voice careful. "She's showing now. Almost 5 months along." "Not yet," I replied, the familiar twist of pain duller but still present. "I'm not ready, and I don't think she is either." My mother sighed, but didn't push. "She asks about you, you know, in her own way." I didn't know how to respond to that. What did "in her own way" mean for someone who had deliberately tried to destroy my life? Was there remorse behind her questions, or just curiosity about whether she had succeeded in breaking me? The sabbatical stretched before me like an open road, 3 months to discover who I was becoming in the aftermath of betrayal. As I packed my suitcase the night before my departure, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: anticipation, not just for the journey itself, but for the woman I might find along the way. 1 year after the birthday dinner that had shattered my world, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and rose. So much had changed in 12 months. External circumstances certainly, but more importantly the landscape of my inner world. My 3-month sabbatical had stretched into 4, as I discovered a freedom and solitude I'd never experienced before. Portugal led to Spain, then a spontaneous decision to visit Morocco. I walked ancient streets, ate meals with strangers who became friends for an evening, slept in rooms, overlooking oceans and mountains. I journaled extensively, the pages filling with observations, not just about the places I visited, but about the person I was becoming. More self-sufficient, more attuned to my own needs and boundaries, more willing to embrace uncertainty. When I returned to work, it was with a clarity and focus that surprised even me. The divorce had been finalized during my travels, the settlement more favorable than I had dared hope. Daniel, perhaps motivated by guilt, or simply eager to escape the social consequences of his actions, had agreed to my terms with minimal resistance. The house had sold for above asking price in my absence, providing a financial cushion that, combined with my restored career momentum, gave me a security I had feared might be lost. Heather had given birth to a baby boy 3 months ago. My mother sent a single photo after asking my permission, a tiny face with Heather's chin, and presumably, Kyle's dark hair. I felt a complicated surge of emotions looking at my nephew, who was innocent of his origins, yet would always represent a painful chapter in my life. I sent a gift card, but declined the invitation to meet him, a boundary my parents had learned to respect. My relationship with my parents had evolved over the year as well. Initial awkwardness gave way to deeper conversations than we'd ever had before. My father in particular had made efforts to connect with me one-on-one, something rare in our family dynamic. During a lunch just between us, he had finally admitted what I had long suspected. "We enabled Heather's behavior over the years," he said, stirring his coffee absently. "We saw how she competed with you, how she crossed lines, but we told ourselves it was normal sibling rivalry. We should have set firmer boundaries. Maybe if we had, maybe nothing would be different." I finished for him. "We can't rewrite the past, Dad. We can only learn from it." My mother still harbored hopes for an eventual reconciliation between her daughters. I neither encouraged nor discouraged these hopes, knowing they comforted her, but unwilling to make promises I couldn't keep. Heather and I had exchanged brief, stilted texts on my birthday. Bray, her message. A simple, happy birthday, that must have cost her considerable pride. Her my response, an equally simple, thank you, that required more forgiveness than I had thought possible a year earlier. I had completely cut ties with Daniel. His occasional attempts to reach out, on holidays on what would have been our anniversary, went unanswered. Whatever closure he sought would have to come from within himself, not from me. The last I heard through unavoidable grapevine gossip, he had moved to Chicago for a fresh start. I wished him neither well nor ill, just absence from my life. In the aftermath of betrayal, I had discovered unexpected gifts. My friendship circle had contracted, but deepened, fair-weather acquaintances falling away, while true connections strengthened. Tara remained my rock, but others had stepped forward too. Colleagues who became friends, neighbors who became confidants, even an aunt I had rarely spoken with, who reached out with surprising wisdom from her own life experiences. I had also met Julian. Not a replacement for what I had lost, but something entirely new. We had connected at a photography exhibition 6 months after my return. His quiet observations about a particularly striking image resonating with my own thoughts. Our relationship developed slowly, deliberately, both of us bringing past wounds to the table, but choosing to build something honest from the beginning. He knew my story, the broad strokes at least, and never pushed for more than I was ready to share. 5 months in, we were still discovering each other, and I was learning to trust again, one careful step at a time. Perhaps the most profound change was in my relationship with myself. The betrayal had forced me to confront painful truths, that I had ignored red flags, that I had sometimes valued the appearance of happiness over actual happiness, that I had allowed others' perceptions to influence too many of my choices. In rebuilding, I had established stronger foundations, clearer boundaries, more authentic self-expression, greater trust in my own instincts. This self-knowledge had led me to an unexpected calling. What had begun as casual conversations with other women navigating betrayal and divorce had evolved into a small support group that met monthly in a community center downtown. I wasn't a therapist or counselor, just someone who had walked the path and could offer a map to others just beginning their journey. Witnessing their growth from devastation to resilience mirrored my own healing process and gave purpose to the pain I had endured. On the anniversary of that fateful birthday dinner, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment, just Tara, Julian, and two close friends from work. There was cake chocolate with raspberry filling, reclaiming what had been tainted wine, and genuine laughter. No dramatic announcements, no hidden agendas, just authentic connection among people who valued each other. Later, after everyone had gone home, and Julian had left with a gentle kiss and plans for the weekend, I returned to the balcony with a final glass of wine. The city had transitioned from sunset to the sparkle of nightlights, thousands of windows representing countless lives and stories unfolding in parallel to my own. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, devastated, betrayed, uncertain of her future. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her that not only would she survive, but she would eventually thrive in ways she couldn't yet imagine. That the pain, acute as it was, would not define her forever. That the betrayal, while never deserved, would ultimately set her free from relationships that diminished rather than enhanced her true self. The lessons had come at a high cost, but they were mine now. Trust your instincts. Real love doesn't diminish you. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not others. Pain can be a powerful teacher if you're willing to learn. And perhaps most importantly, your worth is inherent, not determined by how others treat you. I raised my glass to the city lights, to the year behind, and the years ahead, to the endless possibility of becoming more authentically myself with each passing day. The woman who had sat frozen at that birthday table watching her life implode could never have imagined the strength, wisdom, and yes, even joy that awaited her on the other side of betrayal. Before I end this story, I'd like to ask, have you ever had to completely rebuild your life after a betrayal? What gave you the strength to move forward? Share your experience in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your life come after the most painful ones.